Morning, Louise.
Good morning, Mike.
How are you today?
I am well. It's sunny in Glasgow. I have my
Mm.
coffee. You also have a
Mm-hmm.
coffee, I think. So we're
Yeah.
going to be. Look at your 18 mug. That's ridiculous.
I've got my
That's,
BBFC mug at the ready.
of course you do.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm on my third coffee of the day already, and it's about 11 a.m., isn't it? But
Yeah,
that's fine. That's
it's
fine.
okay. That's how
It's
we
all
are. That's how
part of
we
the
are.
Frightfest magic, isn't it? So we're gonna have a. We've already talked about the opening film. There's no such thing as vampires, but we have
Yes,
thoughts on the other three movies
we
that
do
screened
have
last
thoughts.
night,
We
don't we?
do.
So we're going to discuss, spoiler free, but we're going to discuss I Am Lisa, Triggered, and 12-Hour Shift. We managed to see all of them last
We
night,
did.
didn't we?
Yes.
So what should we start with? Should we start with I Am Lisa, which
Yeah.
was the opening film in the Horror Channel screen, so
Yeah.
it clashed at the same time with There's No Such Thing as Vampires. And this was a werewolf film, wasn't it, Louise?
Yeah, so we have I like the setup here actually. So we have a kind of werewolf revenge movie. So it kind of ticked lots of boxes for me. So we've got Lisa, who's kind of a bit put upon. She's come back to her hometown where she is bullied and everyone hates her, but she has her best friend there. And then the horrific police officer and the officer's family and entire corrupt police force leave her for dead in the woods. And something happens in the woods where well, the nice thing happens where she ends up with superpowers that can then take serious revenge on things, which is
Yeah.
ticks all of my boxes for let's watch women murder people in horrible ways, really.
Totally, yeah. It's a really interesting mix, isn't it? Of like, yeah, you're kind of exploitation-y revenge film. Like you say, horrible people that live in this
Yeah,
little sort of backwoods town
backwater.
in
Yeah,
America, but then sort of merging it with a werewolf film as well. It almost had a bit of a sort of Ginger Snaps vibe at
yes.
times, didn't it, as well? Because it has I don't think she's a teenager, but it almost has a kind of teenage girl element to it as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's what appeals to me is like that whole ginger snaps thing. And I think I just
Hmm.
want everything to be ginger snaps, really.
I know,
So I
I know.
think like transposing that idea of womanhood and monstrosity and, putting those two together and then wrapping them up with revenge should be
Yes.
perfect. But I love the feel of it. Like, I love the idea. I loved her. She was great.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
sometimes I felt like I wanted more from the revenge element. So like the
Mm.
first half I loved, and then by the second half I was like, I feel like I'm maybe giving this a little bit more than it's actually giving me in return, which is a little bit strange to say. Like, I enjoyed it. I liked watching it, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that there could have been more bite, so to speak.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. It was unfortunately a werewolf film that didn't quite have the bite that it promised it would have. And
Yeah.
actually, the treatment of her at the beginning, the reason that she's getting revenge, was in some ways the nastiest bit,
Yeah.
worse than the actual revenge scenes, which is, I think that's the wrong way round sometimes, isn't it? That's the
Totally.
thing.
Yeah, it needs to be balanced. If you
Yeah.
watch something like, Coralie Farger's Revenge, like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, the bit to start with is horrific, but it's dealt with in a way that I find not palatable. That's never palatable, but in a way that was okay for me to deal with, because I
Yeah.
knew that the second half would be such revenge that it would balance off.
Totally
And
satisfying.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so that seesaw that you're talking about, like it did need to be backwards weighted for that, because it was nasty, and I think the way that it was fueled as well was particularly wrapped up in sexuality, etc.,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which I didn't find entirely comfortable. And not
Yeah.
entirely, like, there was a sort of dealing of repressed sexuality, which was painted rather crudely, I thought.
Yeah.
Personally, I
Yeah.
found it quite, I was just like, oh, how's this going to go? And then it didn't quite go the direction I wanted it to. But like, for a monster, for the start of Frightfest, to partner up with some vampires on the other channel.
I know,
Yes.
I know. It was really interesting, wasn't it? And they kind of have the opposite pros and cons, I felt like, because we talked about vampires as being we dug the style, we dug the
Yeah.
mood,
Yeah.
that kind of John Carpenter, neon lit, synthy kind of film.
Yeah.
Didn't really have much of a sense of character or
No.
story, to be
No.
honest. Whereas this film, I felt like the setup was like, okay, I'm liking the characters. I get a sense of character, of place. Like, I get these
Yeah.
people and what's going on here. But maybe it wasn't quite sort of directed with the kind of panache,
Yeah.
maybe, that we could
And
have
it
done
did
with.
have a very, you're right, and it did have a very slick, container. It had
Mm-hmm.
it ticked all of my boxes of red, creepy teen horror font and
Yeah,
structure.
yeah,
And initially it had that kind of like craft like, sort of dreamy
yeah.
intro and stuff, which I then felt, and I guess what the hard thing is, like, when you evoke Honestly, what is it with, like, I've had a lot of coffee this morning. When you evoke those kind and invoke those kind of feelings of those movies, suddenly you're bringing up comparisons immediately.
Yeah.
You know, if you're bringing up, you know, attractive, whether it's teenagers or not, you know, the kind of heat between like arguing women, and then you know it's a horror movie and it's not The Craft, and then you go, why?
I
So it's a
know.
shame. It almost hoists itself on its own petard there, so to speak.
Yeah,
You know, I
it
think
does a
that's
bit. It does a bit. Again, very similar to what we said about vampires. It kind of it's trying to do homage to all of these other better things. Sadly, that's the
yeah,
problem, isn't it? And it's like,
yeah,
oh, but it's difficult. Nobody can live
yeah.
up to some of those
No, they're perfect.
greats. That's the problem. But it was good fun. So that was I Am Lisa. Next up, let's talk about 12-Hour Shift, shall we?
Yes. You can talk about the premise for 12-Hour Shift, Mike.
Yeah, it's do you know what? Maybe I'll just read the Frightfest one, because I did actually read this, didn't I, when we went through the lineup, and it's quite convoluted, but it's really funny. So it's set in 1999. I don't know why that's important, to be honest. The Y2 bug crisis is news, apparently. And at a seedy Arkansas hospital, junkie nurse Mandy is about to work a double shift, but patient care is not top of her agenda. She's in the organ trafficking business with her erratic cousin Regina, who I loved, who is about to pick up a kidney from her and take it to dealers, but the kidney gets misplaced. Mandy must find another source for the kidney or she's toast. So essentially, this is like a kind of kidney heist farce sort of movie, isn't it? I mean, would we even call it a horror film? I don't know. It's not particularly frightening, but it is actually pretty grisly and mean-spirited in a wonderful way, isn't it?
Yeah.
I really loved this film. I thought it was so much fun.
I really loved it too. I think what's really funny is the fact that it's horror in the sense that suddenly, like when a kidney goes missing in a hospital and you go, well, I need another kidney. That's how you make horror, because it turns out that everyone that's walking around are just kidneys on legs. And you're just like, well, we need a kidney. How do we get the kidney out? And who do we get the kidney out of? And it creates all these really bizarre, hilarious, because it really strikes a really interesting tone. So you know that you're living in farce. So it's actually, everything feels okay. Like nothing feels, oh God, this is terrible. It's all funny, but it manages to steer away from just being ludicrous, because something like that could easily fall into the, well, I'm bored because this is absurd.
Yes, it could just be a complete cartoon, couldn't it?
Totally. And it manages to skate that line with some really interesting characters. And I think the nice thing is, where we're watching a Frightfest, and you were saying it yesterday, we can text during it.
Oh,
which
I love it.
Technically, even though you're in the warning, Mike, you're in the put your phone away section. I mean, it's quite ironic that we've been messaging, but like it's being able to talk about it while we're watching it, and how that, I think one of the characters, Regina, she's like kidney mule Harley Quinn. She's the most wonderful character, and like just it manages to be funny and smart and full of interesting characters, and I was really into it.
I was really into it as well. It had a great tone. It had really kind of biting satire of a certain type of people in America as well, but I found it really, really funny. I think it was just on the right side of kind of mean-spirited but fun, you know? Like, I loved it. And some like proper grisly nastiness in it as well. And weirdly, a little role for David Arquette in this film as well.
So he produced it with... So the fact that he kind of rolls in on a gurney, and then he sort of comes to the fore in the third act, which I really liked. And there's also a point, and it's not a spoiler, to say that he's really Dewey at one point, like super Dewey.
He goes full Dewey.
He goes full Dewey, and it's just like, oh, I can't wait. Oh, did we get a Scream 5 date this morning? Did I just make that up?
2022. So we've got a while.
We have a while.
I think it's January 2022, but it will it will arrive. So that's good. Speaking of Dewey,
that'll be a birthday present for me.
I know.
January in 2022.
Yes, how exciting. So there you go. I think that 12-Hour Shift is also coming to streaming services soon. So I think other people will be able to check it out as well. But really fun. One of the highlights of opening night for me.
Watch that, laugh. Yes, drink, laugh, enjoy the kidneys.
Exactly. So, and then finally, this film was absolutely ludicrous but brilliant as well. So this was Triggered, which was playing at the same time as 12-Hour Shift, which is a shame actually that people had to choose between those two. But Triggered. I mean, Louise, you're a gamer. Tell us about Triggered.
Yeah, so I usually cringe when games get turned into films. Games, the best movies tend to be accidental video games like Edge of Tomorrow or Jumanji.
Yeah.
But Triggered has a group of friends. We'll say friends because of course they're not really friends, but they all wake up in the woods after a nice camping trip, strapped with suicide belts. And the suicide belts all have little screens on them, and all the little screens have different times. And it turns out that they find out very quickly, thankfully, that if they happen to kill someone wearing the belt, then they steal that person's time and they become high score. So they're the last one standing. So then the rest of it just plays out like, and obviously a horrible, horrific, explodey thing happens if they happen to count down and get to game over. And the whole thing is just people tramping around in the woods, working out when to kill each other. And it's quite magnificent. It is.
It's kind of like Battle Royale, but I mean, let's be clear, it is not Battle Royale.
It's not Battle Royale. No, it's
definitely
a
really
not.
Kind of ridiculous version of it. But it is. It's like an hour and a half of just kids tromping around, being awful and yelling at each other, and then blowing up, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
I loved it. And do you know what I loved about it? Because to begin with, I thought, this is really bad. I thought the dialogue is absolutely atrocious. But then I started to realize that actually this film is a lot more knowing than I initially gave it credit for. And it's clearly, even the title Triggered, I think it's very much kind of commenting on millennial kind of culture, cancel culture, and just the way that these awful, obnoxious kids or like early 20-somethings kind of talk to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, I was texting friends at the time watching it. I was texting friend of the pod, Josh Tonks, and we were just laughing and just repeating the lines of dialogue in this. You know, I can't even eat gluten. I'm not going to be able to kill anyone. You know, all of these like very kind of millennial kind of references. I knew you were a psycho when you didn't cry at the end of Terminator 2. Was a
he's going down like Bitcoin. Might be one of my favorite things. Nobody has in the history of has ever referenced Bitcoin as anything. And
Brilliant.
and it is that kind of like, you know, if avocado toast made a horror movie. Like
yes, it's exactly that.
It's absolutely
exactly
that.
Don't you dare call me soft. I'm hard. I'm as hard as a priest in a playground. I mean, like,
I don't think I even heard that.
I had to write it down. It was so good. And the dialogue and the action just got more and more absurd and ridiculous as it went on. And that film just won me over more and more the longer it went on, basically.
I think the minute you've got people in like Saw-like traps, you've already decided where that movie lives in your head. And you're suddenly like, that's what I think I love about horror in general, is like the minute you've clamped 11 people or however many it is in a suicide vest, you've mentally gone, well, you're dog meat, so I may as well enjoy what you do right now. And that's why, because people go, oh, I couldn't watch Saw, I couldn't watch any of these things. It's like, no, but you don't understand, because the minute you put them in those situations, they're dead meat. It doesn't matter. You don't really care who's going to live out of all of that. Like, and they're so malicious. One person in particular, I love his complete degradation into a total psychopath in a matter of minutes.
That's incredible.
And it's genuinely something quite spectacular.
And he goes full, you know, somebody mentions Patrick Bateman, and then there's a whole conversation about getting the wrong Bateman, and they talk about Jason Bateman and stuff. I mean, the dialogue
he's wearing a yellow like slicker as well, which I don't remember anyone donning at any point, but
I know. I was all for it. And I think like they made the characters, all of them, abhorrent enough that you just didn't care. Like you were just more than happy to watch them all die one by one. And again, it was clearly working to a small budget, and being set in the woods. I knew that clearly they had picked like the same sort of 5 square meters of woods and would just filming it
through the same bit.
And you can't really, and everything just kind of looks a bit kind of dull bluey green throughout the whole film. I wish it had been as outrageous looking as it was in the script. You know what I mean? Like I could have done with it being more wacky and cartoony almost, because it's quite dirgy to look at. That's the only problem I have with it.
It is that, but I did really enjoy the things themselves, because they seemed very tactile, and they seemed like when time shifted, or there was some blue lights that I really like. So your blue lights if you're okay, and suddenly it goes red if you only have like 5 minutes to go or something. And I loved the drama of that, because sometimes there was a time where you saw the lights change, but they didn't know yet, and you were like, oh dude, oh dear. And it's an interesting way of dealing with time in a movie, isn't it? It's like the reverse of a Nolan movie. It's just suddenly like everyone has time, and you never really kept an eye on who had what time, but you knew that everyone was running down. So you knew that you only had a matter of time short, to watch these kids die.
So there you go. So that was 12-hour. No, that was not 12. That was Triggered.
That was Triggered.
Forgetting the title.
Oh dear, it's only the beginning, Mike.
It's only the beginning. So there you go. So just quickly having a little glance at today's lineup. We got lots of films to get through today. Is there anything that you're particularly excited about today?
I have already watched The Columnist. And I have lots to say about The Columnist.
Amazing.
And I would suggest that everybody watches The Columnist.
Yes, The Columnist. We've both talked about how we're quite intrigued / excited about Blind. I hope we're not disappointed by Blind.
Oh yeah, I'm in for Blind. After you saying about the whole premise of that, yes.
Yeah, basically Hush, but with blindness instead of deafness, essentially. It's the setup to the film. We've got Don't Click, which is a kind of, I think, like a kind of social media-y sort of horror film.
Another social media, interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be the running theme, isn't it? And we've got The Horror Crowd, which is a documentary about horror crowds, people like us. So that could be interesting. And The Honeymoon Phase, which we've both seen, and we both have probably stuff to say about that film as well.
We do have things to say. We have things to say.
Yeah. So we will report back again at some point very soon.
Looking for more horror content? Subscribe now for more videos like this one, and listen to the Evolution of Horror podcast. Head on over to evolutionofhorror.com.